Guys, welcome back to Serial at Midnight. This is a very interesting conversation that I cannot wait to share with you. We're talking to the author of American Scary, and then the subheading of this new book is Conversations with the Kings, Queens, and Jesters of Late Night TV Horror, Volume 1. I'm joined by Michael Monahan. Michael, welcome to Serial at Midnight.
Thanks for inviting me into the clubhouse. I appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me to write a pull quote on the back of this book too, because it's got a Serial at Midnight quote. This book is an indispensable chronicle of the local ghost hosts and friendly phantoms that beckoned young and old alike into the dark ride. A seance resurrecting voices from a bygone era that still have the power to frighten and delight, says Heath Holland of Serial at Midnight.
Yes, I know that young man. I've heard that name somewhere before.
It was a joy to contribute that to this book because I believe that it's true. This is a chronicle, the first part of a chronicle, of the wild, unregulated, late, not even necessarily late night, but that whole TV horror host thing when you could turn on the television and bizarre things could be bombarding your brain without somebody controlling it and using it to sort of, without regulating it. You've talked to so many people in the service of putting this together. Well, first of all, it's comes out of the American Scary documentary, documentary project,
Oh,
right? From what was it,
yeah.
2000, what year was that?
Well, it finally came out in 2006, but it was a project that began in 2004. Prior to that, uh, I'd been talking to anyone who would listen and a few who wouldn't, about wanting to do a horror host documentary of some kind because it was a topic that I had gotten very passionate about. And, you know, but it was also really clear that I didn't have the expertise, the money, and really, most importantly, the confidence to pull something like that off. In 2003, Sandy Clark was in San Francisco at a Comic-Con convention when it was still up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And he saw Bob Wilkins, our Creature Features host, sitting at a table with a line going out the door. And he was fascinated by the idea that here was somebody who had a TV show that hadn't been on the air for 25 years and yet, you know, had such loyalty from the fans still existing after all that time. And so he spoke with someone who was working with Bob, who pointed to me as someone who could fill him in on uh, Bob's background and just on horror hosts in general. So Sandy and I got together. He was a filmmaker. So, and he was looking for a project. So it was just kismet. It was just a perfect connection. And he's also a great organizer. So as soon as we decided, yeah, this needs to be done, he was on it. And he started organizing all the interviews and pulling the names together and things like that. And and we just jumped on it right away. There was a convention in the Midwest out in Cleveland area. Um, as it happened that same year, that featured a number of different TV horror hosts at the convention itself. So, like the Ghoul and Dr. Shock from Toledo and Dr. Creep and Count Gordeval. And so we were able to get a big nut in all at once. That was our initial foundation for the documentary. And from there, we traveled to New York, spoke with Zachary. We traveled to Los Angeles and talked with Vampira. But it was really that first convention in Cleveland that kicked it all off. Once the film was in production, I was talking with Sandy and expressing some frustration over the idea that I knew ultimately we were only going to be using 3, 4 minutes of any of these given interviews. And these are interviews that were like an hour, hour and a half long.
Hmm.
And these people were talking about so much deep history, not just about their shows, but about um, live TV and the transition to tape and the transition from that to cable. So they were talking about a larger history and their own cultural backgrounds that were going on at the time. Like, just as a for instance, you know, Golardi went on the air in Cleveland weeks after John Kennedy was shot in Dallas. I mean, it was actually months, a couple months. So that was in the air at the same time that Golardi was hit in the air, and at the same time that the Beatles arrived. So that created this kind of synergistic energy, at least in the Cleveland area. Golardi and the Beatles were huge at the time, and that's a special kind of energy. And then, Mila Nurmi, Vampira, she hung around with Orson Welles. She met Elvis, um,
See,
Stanley
the
Kubrick.
account of her outside, isn't she like in the back of the venue, like outside the back of the theater, I think, when
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Elvis comes out and he's like he's basically been, I don't remember if they booed him, but they weren't into it.
They booed him because
Yeah.
yeah,
This guy with
just
eyeliner comes out and people, and he goes back in for a second performance and she was like, didn't he proposition her too? He was like, if you want to have a
he
little,
he did. She claimed nothing happened. Other people said, yeah, it kind of did.
yeah.
So, but yeah, it was his first show in Vegas. He was opening in Vegas. So yeah, so she had that experience with him, and Christopher Coffin from Flint, Michigan. He met JFK and Jerry G. Bishop, the original Svengoolie, was a DJ in Cleveland at the time that the Beatles hit, and he was chosen because he was so popular as a DJ, chosen as sort of the pool reporter to travel with the Beatles when they were touring the States. And Ernie Anderson, who was Golardi, hated the Beatles. He hated rock and roll. He was a jazz guy,
Yeah.
hated the Beatles. But his gopher, Ron Swede, who later became the Ghoul, loved the Beatles. And so Ernie got him into Beatles press conferences, and um, Ron took a number of photos that are like up at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and show up in books and such. And he also filmed the Beatles with a 16 millimeter camera at one of their concerts in Cleveland, and that later showed up in Ron Howard's 8 Days a Week uh, documentary film.
Hmm.
So there's just all these connections bouncing around for that.
And you're
Uh,
listening to these interviews, right? You're there in the room as these things are being recorded, and you know that they're going to get cut way down.
oh yeah,
Public, for whatever is how long, I don't even remember how long that documentary is, but it's not like it's a 5 hour thing. It's a
no, it's
30.
like not even. It should have been a
Yeah.
should have been a PBSer. Um,
Ken Burns
but
presents a
yeah,
bad
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Martha, I've seen the most marvelous television host. Um, but yeah, so early on, I asked Sandy, look, once the film is out, once we're done with the film, can I have access to the interviews and release them as a book? Just put everything out, the complete interviews. He was all for it. And so that was the initial basis for the book. Once I started work on that, I conducted some additional interviews by phone. So Rich Coase, who we weren't able to coordinate with when we were originally filming, um, interviewed him by phone. Ned the Dead out of Wisconsin, a few other people that we had just missed. I had the chance to gather up an interview and get those in the book as well. Rich Rich Coase was really funny. I wrote down like a list of 5, 6 questions. So okay, here's what we're going to hit. So I called him, picked, I said, asked him the first question, and he immediately ran into a story that took in the rest of them. So it's like, 10 minutes in, and I'm like looking for a second question.
Yeah.
Luckily, he had a lot to say,
He
and
can talk. I mean, yeah.
he had a real varied career. He worked radio and he
Mhm.
worked television, and for years, bouncing back and forth. And so, yeah, he had a lot to talk about. Plus, he was able to talk some about the original Sven and what he. And this was when I talked to him. It was just before MTV picked them up.
Me TV.
MeTV, excuse me.
Yeah. Could
Yeah,
you
when
imagine him on
MeTV
me on MTV? That would be such a
actually kind of
crazy.
can actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, when it was just before MeTV picked him up, and that
Syndicated nationwide,
exploded.
right?
That
Yeah.
and
That's when I first became aware of him because I didn't know about Svengoolie before
yeah,
that.
what is your experience with horror hosts beyond Svengoolie? Do you have any
I
at
have
all?
none. No, it was over by the time I was able to watch TV. Now, here's the other thing that's under the undercurrent to this is that had those horror hosts still been on the air when I was watching television in Alabama in the early 1980s or whatever, would I have been allowed to even watch that? Probably not, but because of the way that I grew up and the sheltering and all that stuff. But
Yeah,
I mean, you know more than I do. Were there a lot of Southern this seems to look like a Midwestern thing and a California thing and an urban thing.
no, not really. It was pretty much every state, and
Okay.
this kind of goes back to the fact that this was a period of locally produced television. So horror hosts aren't the only high-profile, multi-generational types of hosts that are out there. There are kid show hosts, and yeah, there are a number of hosts in the South. Morgus being the most prominent from New Orleans,
Well,
and
that makes perfect sense because New Orleans is just steeped in voodoo culture and
exactly, yeah,
mysticism and all of that stuff.
yeah. He had I maybe not even surprisingly, but he had a look. He was on the air since 1959. He had a look that I suspect Jerry Lewis copped for the Nutty Professor, with the big teeth and
Yeah.
and the weird hair and stuff like that. And plus of course being a really comically ineffectual mad scientist.
Hmm.
But yeah, so he was there. There was Dr. Paul Bearer. He was on the air for 25 years down in Florida, and there were a couple of Dr. Shocks in various markets, again down south as well as the ones in Philly. And
Your mention of Paul Bearer just reminded me of the Undertaker manager Paul Bearer and how the
right,
line between that regional horror host and regional wrestling personalities is pretty thin. You wouldn't see it in the like by the 90s it was starting to go away because companies were buying other companies, but in the 60s and the 70s and even in the 80s when I was a kid, it's some of those wrestling personalities had these huge gimmicks that would not survive into the television era, really would
right.
not survive into the corporate owned era, when people could still believe in the I've heard stories about, people would heat up coins with their cigarette lighters. Then when the wrestler would walk by, they'd press the hot coin to their skin.
Jeez.
Crazy stuff like that because they believe he's really a villain, that sort of a thing. There was this power of belief
The
that, and
heel, yeah,
yes, not necessarily that everybody believed. I think there were probably people who believed Vampira was some entity of evil, but there was some sort of a lowered bar of disbelief, I think, that existed at that time. That I don't know if we have that anymore.
yeah. Well, it's it and this goes. It's the horror host, the kid show host. It's playing dress up. The wrestlers. It's
Right.
that any sort of larger than life or alternate reality character was just tailor made for television.
Hmm.
And especially on that local level, when you had within a market, if you were lucky if you had four stations, most people had three. And each of the individual stations were looking for developing a personality, uh, a Channel 6 family that people develop their loyalties to. And so you'd have competing kid show hosts in different markets. Captain Penny would have the Three Stooges, but Barnaby would have the Popeye cartoons. It was that type of thing.
Hmm.
And it was the same. It's less so with horror hosts. You know, there generally be one per market, two per market at the same time, but they would extend over periods of years because it's something that you pointed to as far as the Midwest and even more so kind of easing toward the East Coast was that when you had a limited number of stations in a particular market, and on top of that, you had brutal winters, people were stay at home.
Yes.
So they were locked, you, unless you really, really wanted to talk to your family, people were locked into their TVs. Talk about developing loyalty. You had a captive audience for that.
Hmm.
And there's also, I think there's a difference between East Coast and West Coast. LA tends to um, discard things pretty quickly, whereas sort of the East Coast frame of mind is more to hang on to them. And
Hmm.
even into the Midwest, like Sammy Terry in Indianapolis, lasted 30 years on and off. Um, but people really hold on to things tight. So Big Chuck Shadowski, who was um, Goulardi's creative partner and co-creator in the early days, went on to his own career hosting films that lasted over 40 years in Cleveland and was tied into the whole Goulardi culture at the same time. And he would often talk about people coming up with their kids saying, "Hey, I grew up watching you and now we watch you together." And so there's there's real pride in that, both for the viewer and for Chuck, or people like him who just, you know, think about that. Someone's, 25 years, 30 years later, bringing their children to see you, having grown up with you. That really has to mean a lot if you're a broadcaster.
Hmm.
That's success.
Yeah. Well, I also like the the history that comes with you've talked about it too. Like I'm going to reference the Zachary chapter here, where the interview with Zachary, and you've pointed out the arrival of the shock theater package
Right.
to the syndicated. They're feeding these horror hosts these movies, which they then talk about. But these guys will talk about what movies they could get and how they would try to find something, how they would look at where they were going to break into the movie to give their
Right.
comments, their comedy comments or whatever it would be their satirical take, and how they would have to time it, and how there was this live element to it where it wasn't. I mean, I'm assuming Svengoolie, they know exactly where they're going to bust the new Svengoolie, that they
Yeah,
know
sure.
exactly where they're going to bust in, and they've probably pre-recorded those, and they could probably even reuse some of those for all I know. But this idea of like television transitioning from live to pre-tape, and sometimes it's a mix of both of those things. This is
Right.
fascinating to me because it really feels like there's no net.
Yeah, Zachary especially kind of underlined that particular point, that what a difference it was for him going from live to tape, going from performing at midnight on a Friday to taping on a Thursday afternoon, and not feeling that sort of exchange, that energy that comes with a live audience. Um, the wild thing about live TV, and I still feel this when I watch old kinescopes, whether it's Playhouse 90 or I'm even thinking specifically of the Host and Rodney um, kinescopes uh, from oh gosh, what was it? Kansas. Um, they still feel vital and immediate watching them now because and some of it's just the lighting or whatever, but it just feels like it's happening right in front of you. It is, you are literally looking through the window of the studio. You know, it's
Mhm.
it still feels that kind of fresh. And even moving over to tape, you lose that.
Yeah.
You're seeing something that's documented. You know it. Even if it's live to tape. And when they first transitioned to tape, most of the programs were still doing live to tape because these were cheaply produced shows. There was not a lot of production value going into them that wasn't coming from the creative minds behind it. Um,
Was it Zachary who did the Jello thing? Just speaking
yeah,
about budget, I mean, that's like such a cheap thing. You get all this mileage out of Jello.
yeah. Oh, and Karen Cioli, Stella out of Philly, was talking about how the crew that worked with her on her show, the TV crew, um, worked with Ernie Kovacs when he was back in Philly. He said, "This is the most fun we've had since Ernie," because it horror hosting and I'm going to say kid show hosting as well, where there's such opportunities to be creative. Someone could just stand up and say, "Here's our movie tonight." No one's going to do that when they have the opportunity to do strange things and have just barrels of fun on TV. And one of my favorite things about existing footage of Zachary or Gallardi or anything from that period is hearing the crew cracking up off camera, in the middle of something, or especially when something screws up and everyone just starts to lose it,
Mhm.
and then that slow fade to commercial just seems more like, okay, we're out of here.
Well, you touch on some of that in your introduction. You've written this. I mean, it is a majestic thesis, and it pretty much gives me goosebumps because I love it so much. But you're talking
Oh,
about how this was a wild time, and
yeah.
there was something that was very subversive about all of this. And it was, I don't want to say it was dangerous because I don't know that dangerous is the right word, but it was just this beautiful, wonderful chaos that we can't have anymore. We're not allowed to have that thing anymore, but we did have it for a while, and wasn't it wonderful?
Part of the thing I got from, again, from talking to these people, um, a lot of the early hosts were predominantly male vampiricide, and there were female hosts in other areas of the country, Santina, Tarantula Ghoul, and Seattle, things like this. But they were predominantly male, and most of those guys had come back from the war, and so there was that sense of brotherly camaraderie and just knockabout play and who gives a crap. There were, when you know, when you're back home from being shot at, your general manager yelling at you, it's not going to faze you that much, But, a lot of it really did seem to stem from just that sort of um, war-framed team
Hmm.
kind of quality that
Yeah.
happened.
We had come together in a way that I don't know. I saw it a little bit after 9/11, where we all seemed to
Yeah.
come together for about a month and a half, and then it was over. But there was I know what you mean. And that experience, it was this huge shared experience by all of America, it was by the world, but by all of America. And there was this, you see it in the movies too. It's that who gives a crap attitude that you just talked about. Like, there are more
Yeah.
important things to worry about than getting upset about children's entertainment or a TV show or a horror movie or something like that.
One of my favorite stories along those lines was Ernie Anderson and Gallardi, and um, his general manager Ted Bays, and he had this really aggressive relationship with each other. And Ted Bays, just to piss Ernie off, at one point cut his budget for cameras going out to these ball games. Ernie had a team that would go out and do a bunch of these uh, um, amateur ball games for charities and things like this, and they would film, and then they would show the film on the Gallardi show, and Ted Bays cut that, said no, you can't have that anymore. And again, this is live TV. So Ernie Anderson comes on that week. He goes and he says, I know a lot of you have tuned in to see yourselves on TV tonight from our last ball game show. You probably called your families and told them to tune in so they could watch as well. Well, our general manager, Ted Bays, he doesn't think so much of you people. And so we're not showing anything this week. And if you have any complaints, and he reached down and he brought up a card, here's his home phone number. And apparently, Ted Bays had to change his phone number because it was nonstop all that weekend. He
Yeah.
could not get off the phone. So,
And of
um,
course, nobody could ever get away with that now.
no,
20 years ago or 30 years ago, you can't do that.
yeah, and all they could do was threaten him a little bit, but he was drawing such huge numbers. The crime rate in Cleveland was went down like 25-30% because of Gallardi
That's
on
crazy.
Friday nights,
I'm thinking
and
about knocking over this bank, but I got to get home and turn the TV on at a certain time.
yeah, Gallardi showing Spy in the Sky, and I know he hates that one, so I got to be there.
Wow,
Yeah,
it's amazing. And
yeah, and
I'm sorry, go ahead.
oh no, 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 please.
Well, I was going to say it's sad that a lot of this stuff doesn't survive anymore because a lot of it was sort of live at the time. Talk a
Yeah,
little bit about the survival of these things. I know there's some kinescopes, which you just mentioned, but like, I mean, I think Zachary says, and Vampire and Zachary both mention how a lot of what they did is just, it's in the ether. It was of its time and
yeah,
then nothing remains.
yeah. So much of it was live. Um, the only reason that some of that earliest Gallardi stuff survives is because they did tape segments for, using, outdoor skits and even some of the skits in the studio. Um, but some of the live material survived only because they were testing the kinescope camera. And so they said, oh, here, we'll just do some of this Gallardi stuff. And then once that was done in the filmless process, um, someone came to Chuck, said, "Oh, okay, here's a kinescope. You want this?" Nah, I don't care. And he put it in a drawer. And later, when Ernie left, Ron Swede saved that film because he just went into Ernie's office and took everything that he could. He was a huge Gallardi fan and very, very loyal to Ernie Anderson. So that's the only reason that stuff survives. Um, Similarly, when they were doing, I think it was a 40th anniversary show on the host in Rodney, out in Kansas. At the end of the special, they said, "This is the only footage that we got is this little opening credit segment from the show. If anyone has anything, please let us know." I mean, this is after 40 years. They had nothing, and turns out someone had like 90 minutes worth of kinescopes from 1958, 1959, the early shock stuff.
Yeah.
Uh, and it all just dropped at once, and it's in great condition, looks great. Um, Vampira had a number of shows that she said had been put on film for when they were discussing syndication. Zachary in New York and Vampira in LA were both being talked about as syndicated cross cross country programs. Uh, Vampira said that they filmed some of the shows. The station soured on her before the syndication went through, and they packed up all the reels and took it to uh, the Museum of Television out there in LA. And they pulled them back out for a anniversary show that KTLA, her station, was doing. Someone pulled it out of the vaults and it disappeared. So apparently she claims again, like 90 minutes, couple hours of Empira material just up and vanished and, never to be seen.
You think that's in
Um,
somebody's private collection?
yeah, yeah, it's where you can just enjoy nobody else seeing it. Um, and then later on, I know Bob Wilkins, our creature features guy, thought that all of his stuff had been erased because people would recycle the tapes week to week when they were doing programs on tape because the tape was so expensive. And so they would have to erase and just reuse the tapes every week. Um, but as it turned out, one of Bob's friends on the crew had been socking away some of his tapes. And luckily, the machinery was still around to pull them back out. Like years later, they found a stack of this stuff. And so a couple of hours of creature features material from early 70s survives because of that. And similarly, Fritz the Night Owl um, was convinced that all of his material was gone. Someone he was working with just in the last 10 years or so said, um, "Hey Fritz, what's all that stuff over in the corner?" Gee, I don't know. And they move some boxes, and it's like stacks. I mean, hours and hours worth of Fritz material from the 80s was just stacked in a corner of his garage. He had forgotten all about it.
Unbelievable. Has any of that stuff made it to the public? Is there a way for us to see that stuff?
A lot of stuff shows up on YouTube. Um, but more importantly, um, some people actually organized the material and put it out onto disk. So I believe you can still find Bob Wilkins DVDs and also um, his follow-up host, John Stanley. There's somebody who has a pretty substantial library of old material from both of those guys. If you just punch in a search for Bob Wilkins DVD, it should pop up. I think it's Garfield Lane, or it might be Garfield Lane. Um, and similarly, someone did do official releases on DVD and later Blu-ray for Fritz the Night Owl. And I'm not sure where they're selling those right now,
Okay.
but they are available. So if you look up Fritz the Night Owl, you find that. And then Big Chuck and Little John, um, who were who followed on from Houlihan and Big Chuck, and then later they became Big Chuck and Little John. All of that material, volumes and volumes of that stuff, is available at the Big Chuck Little John website. And there's some complete shows, in fact. And archive.org has some complete shows from Big Chuck Little John. Similarly, the Ghoul from Cleveland, there are some complete shows from his program in the 90s when he came back on the air there. Some they're around. Any place that has a local fan base who have some sort of technical sideline tends to, find and restore the material from their local hosts. When we interviewed the people the directors who worked on the Asmodeus Shakatumi Theater show, which was my first guy, it was Asmodeus and then Bob Wilkins. Um, they found and restored some short things. They don't have much, but it was the first time I got to see Asmodeus in like 40 years. It was amazing to see that material. Um, so yeah, it's kind of spotty, but it's around, and that might be another one of those things. It's the probably the closest you're getting to those that that idea of local TV in isolated markets, because this stuff is popping up in each of those markets, but there's not this umbrella that collects all of it together in one place.
Hmm.
So you have to know the host and then track down the information there. Morgus similarly has a number of different DVDs and stuff that are out.
Well, see, that's why it's important that books like yours exist, because if you don't have a guide to tell you who these people are, this is increasingly becoming lost information
Yes.
if you don't have the map.
Yeah.
So that's
Yeah. And again, that's all local TV history, not just TV horror hosts.
yes.
But
Did I tell
you
you
know,
about the book? I think I did. You and I email semi-regularly, and I think I told you that I was slowly working my way through a book about Saturday morning television.
oh yeah.
And I don't, it might just be called, I will have put the cover up in the video version of this conversation so people can see it. But, because it's so dense in what it is, I am slowly, I mean, I've been reading it for like a year, but it's, talking about how it was published in the early 80s and the thoughts by the author are that by the time the 80s arrive and Reagan has deregulated the airwaves so that they can
Hmm.
advertise directly to children, then all the shows become commercials for products like Transformers and GI Joe, and I mean it was all in service of selling
Right.
toys and Happy Meals and cereals and things like that. But that if you can go back to the prior version, really when television starts, the late 40s, the 1950s, that is an era when it's what we're talking about, and they view baby boomers, if I may speak generally, tend to view that era of TV as this wonderful, moral, sort of challenging, wild, creative, fertile period for entertainment. Whereas I grew up in the 1980s, and 80s kids nostalgia, man. I mean, it is a serious thing. We're still watching Transformers, we're still watching He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, but it's so fascinating. And I'm the old guard now, I'm aging beyond the target audience for so much of this stuff. It's now
Yeah.
Gen Z and millennials and people who were born in the 90s or the aughts. And the idea that once upon a time, before Transformers and before even, the worlds of Sid and Marty Croft. Before all of that, there was this really interesting, chaotic, wild time for television, and it is really being lost, except for books like this and books that chronicle what it was like at that time. It is becoming more and more of a distant thing, but there are people who are telling that history and who are recording that history, and that's what this is, and it's so important. So I think I'm just saying thank you for capturing this stuff because it is so important. It is vital that we remember this.
Yeah. I remember when we talked to some of the people involved more than once. I, they said thank you for capturing this time.
Well, some of them aren't even
I'm
here
really
anymore.
glad that you're doing this,
Yeah.
and it's such a positive thing to hear from the creators.
You got
And
stories from people who aren't with us anymore.
yeah, exactly. And when we spoke with them, they were energized. They were so happy to be talking about this stuff. Chili Billy Cardill in in Philly, and Zachary and um, Dr.
Billy Billy, page 179.
Yeah, they. I mean, they were delighted. Oh, and Baron Damone and Dr. Enoch Whitty out of Syracuse in New York. Those guys just exemplified what the local host was because they both had long careers in other media in the town, but the people knew them by name, would stop them on the street, say, every week, or then as the years went on, and they'd still be recognized on the street by their friends and neighbors, which is a really different thing. And that's a topic that came up often as well, is that idea of local celebrity. And local celebrity is not just the fact that they live next door, but it was like this idea that celebrity was achievable. You
Local
know,
boy makes
it,
good.
yeah, it's like, there levels of celebrity that you see now that kids just go, that's impossible.
Yeah.
But, Captain Satellite here in the Bay Area, you'd see him shopping for melons in the store. You go, oh my gosh, it's Captain. I actually did meet Captain Satellite once going to a movie, and Bob March was his name, and so we were talking a little bit, and I mentioned to him, "Oh yeah, it was really great seeing you in Magnum Force." He goes, "What? I was in that?" "Yeah, you were there at the very beginning. You were the DA, that talking at the news." "Oh yeah, I was in that, wasn't I?" So, but just the idea of local celebrity is it's just so nice. They would go to do um, uh, school. They would go to do school events. My wife met Dr. Schock from Philadelphia at a school event, and um, Christopher Coffin would talk about doing various events. Stella from Philly would go and um, teach kids to do teach kids about the importance of reading. Baron Damone, years, decades after he had done his program, was doing a drop and roll video for the local fire department. I love stuff like that.
Yeah.
Those are roots.
Once
Those
a
are roots within
broadcaster,
your
always a
community.
broadcaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's it's wonderful. So what's the plan? This is volume one, and I know
Yes.
this is published by Bear Manor Media, which is a great resource for really interesting, sometimes esoteric topics that nerds like me really love.
Yeah, it's a real pop culture. Yeah,
Yes.
deep dive pop culture type of stuff. And uh so the second volume is done. It's completed. It has a number of interviews. Both volumes are expanded from the original 2011 printing. So there was a top to bottom rewrite on the intros and the bios. The interviews are all um, relatively the same, the exceptions being one for Bob Wilkins. Um, when we interviewed him for the American Scary documentary, he was already kind of, um, he had Alzheimer's
Hmm.
and it was starting to show. And he was really charming, really funny, really happy to be there, but he just didn't have a lot of the details. Um, But there was another interview that had been published back in the late 90s that was a great career spanning interview where you got all those nuts and bolts. And so I went to that author and asked for permission to reprint that. So that's in this edition of the book now.
Okay.
And it's
Wonderful.
a much more fitting representation
Well,
of,
you
of Bob
also do,
Observes.
you will fact check these people too, if there's something that seems incongruous to the truth. Like I think in Vampira's interview, I'll see if I can find it really quick, but she says something about, she'd been basically canned by her superiors, and she says something along the lines of, they went and did was it the Munst? No, it was the Addams family. She's like they did
Yeah,
the
they
Addams
went
family,
into
and
an
you're like,
Adams
and she's
family. She
like,
thought it was because of that.
she thought
Yeah.
it was they were really close to she by her account those two things were very close to each other, and you're like it was 10 years later, you inject this little thing, it was 1966 or whatever it was.
Yeah.
That's
But
important though because it's keeping it honest too.
well, not everyone remembers everything.
Well, they were
Yeah.
elderly too is the
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. And the amazing thing about Vampira is that she has a reputation for spinning tales. And once we did it in the course of the interview, there were a couple points I was going, uh-huh, sure. Uh-huh. Oh, I question that. And then later research finds that, yep, she was right. Her telling of it might be a little oversized,
Embellished maybe,
but
yeah.
yeah, but the core information is correct. Um,
She comes across as such a dame in the old school sense of the word,
oh
like what a
God,
dame.
she really was. It was so much fun. We went out to lunch with her after we did the interview, and um, a waiter came around who remembered her from a different restaurant that he used to work at. And she talked with him, and they were, she was just delighted to see him. And, but she thought of, he thought enough of her to stop by the table and say hi to her. We had a young film student who was helping us with the Southern California leg of our interviews. And he was sitting with us at the lunch, and she's just going on, airily telling stories about
Holding
New
court.
York and Orson Welles and such. And she says, "Yes, and I used to serve coffee to Marlon Brando. He would come in, and who was that other fellow? Oh, um, a Clockwork Orange." And the film student goes, "Stanley Kubrick?" Oh yes, that was him. And so she was really in her element. It
Yes.
was a lot of fun talking with her.
Yeah, she's such a boy. It really does feel like she's holding court.
Volume two should be coming out. I'm not sure if it's going to be late this year or early next year, but it kind of picks up the story from the early 70s onward.
Hmm.
Everything is organized chronologically so that the conversations follow the ups and downs and the changes in the broadcasting landscape, which I thought was really important. And so you see people talking about that transition to live, the transition to tape, um, the rise of UHF and how that created a whole bunch of new opportunities for programming because
Hmm.
every time you expand, um, they need to fill some space. And movies are a easy way to do it. And hosts of films, whether it's a horror host or a Dialing for Dollars host or whatever, is a just added value to your presentation of a
Yeah.
film. And so they went through various cycles of growth and contraction over the years until finally it kind of went off the cliff with the rise of syndicated programming and infomercials, which took over the late night
What era,
schedule.
what year, around what time do you put that at? 80s, certainly,
It's
right?
it's sort of it moves from the very late 70s into the mid 80s
Okay.
is when that really kind of brought it down. There were still a few hosts in the 80s or even beginning in the 80s, like the Son of Ghoul out of Cleveland started in 1986. He's still on the air. Um,
Well, there's the
and
one that got away too, which is Elvira.
yeah, that was originally supposed to be a Vampira revival, and they had asked her to train somebody up. And at the last minute, the producers started pulling some crap, and eventually, Mila was pushed out or signed out herself. Um, and they just rejiggered things slightly and called it Elvira.
Hmm.
And that, I mean, Elvira was a phenomenon that kind of really so overshadowed what the horror host genre was. I mean, it was just, you know,
Well, it
uh,
was commercial, is what it
it
was.
was very, very commercial.
In your introduction, you talk about, or at some point in the book, you talk about trying to get Elvira to sit down for
Yeah.
one of these interviews, and it never happened. Have you sent her a copy of this?
No, well, no.
Okay.
Bottom line,
Yeah.
no, I just haven't.
I just wonder if she saw the history. I mean, she's not a part of it. She's not a part of this account by her
It,
own choosing.
it's really tough, and some of it I understand. When we first approached her for the documentary, uh, you have to figure geeks like us were approaching her for documentaries forever,
Yeah.
and they're just nobody no going nowhere kind of
Well, and
backyard
she's
fan
still doing
voice.
conventions too, so I'm sure, every week she's probably seeing hundreds of people who are like, "Miss Elvira, I love to you. I hit puberty because of you," or something that she doesn't want to hear that. She wants
Yeah,
to. Well, I don't know what she wants to hear. I'm just guessing, but yeah, I'm sure that there was an element of fatigue to it. But you've done the work
yeah,
now, so.
and also just and just uncertainty because she didn't know who we were,
Hmm.
you know, because later in the process, and unfortunately, it was like seriously, we're like a week away from going on the festival circuit where I guess she finally heard back from enough people who said, "Oh, no, 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 this is legit. This is happening. This is a project that's, on its way." Um, and she finally did get back in touch with Sandy and say, "Hey, look, I'd like to be involved." And, we just
Yeah.
didn't have any way to do it. Uh, so I did follow up for the book. I wanted to, um, get her into the book version at least. And initially, it sounded like that was going to happen, and then at the last minute, I don't know, whatever reasons, it didn't. And
She's probably going to do her own. I mean, I think she did write
oh,
a
she
book.
already
So,
did. Yeah, she did
yeah.
her own bio. Yeah,
Yeah. Maybe that's part of it. She's like, well, I'm selling my own thing because it's about commercialism. Remember, it's about selling things.
yeah. But yeah. Anyway, that was really unfortunate
Yeah.
because she's such a vital part of the second half of the horror host story. And it really, again, it's such a different thing. It, as you say, it was more product than horror,
Hmm.
really.
Well, she was advertising for beer, and I remember going to the
Coors.
grocery store as a kid, and there'd be huge, like a life-size cardboard cutout of her selling like I don't know, it was like Coors Light or
It
something
was
like that.
Coors. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. I've got one of the blow up versions of that with
of
her
course you
holding
do.
a six pack. And uh, there's a company that's still producing new Elvira and actually also new Vampira material. Creepy.
The
Uh,
company that you were just referencing is Creepsville, and the
oh,
website is
Creepsville.
Creepsville 666 is their storefront.
Yeah,
And yeah, they have
yeah,
Elvira stuff and Vampire stuff, and they're keeping it going.
yeah. It's really worth checking out. They've got some uh, unique uh, items that
Yeah.
are they're well worth it.
So, what's next? I mean, there doesn't have to be anything next. It's not like this is a minor achievement. This is a huge achievement. But now that you've been writing again, do you see
Yeah,
an opportunity to chronicle something else? Do you have this urge to tell historical accounts of things?
I I I've been thinking seriously about doing another just overview of the horror host genre that's
I
not
think you should.
specific to the interviews. The spook shows and radio combined that kind of created the template for the TV horror movie hosts, especially the midnight spook shows like you've got there,
Yes.
because
Yes.
those are where they would have the traditional spook show with a blackout at the end, but then they'd have a movie afterwards. And that,
Mhm.
so you've got
Yeah.
characters like Dr. Silkini doing, presenting this Grand Guignol style comedy magical act, and then a movie. Perfect. That's a
Yeah.
horror host right there.
And they
And
would do
then,
gimmicks too. So this shirt is a
yes, yeah,
J Bones. Thank you. They would be, like win a dead body. You could win a dead body, and then it would be like a chicken, like a
yeah,
frozen chicken or something like that. Just
yeah.
gimmicky but fun.
Where is that? Yeah. In
You got
fact,
stuff.
yeah, Dr. Evil was was one of those types of hosts.
Oh, nice. Also,
And
the person, the Mummy and King Kong. Wow.
yeah. Oh, and yeah, and um the ghoul stole his gorilla costume from Dr. Silkini when he was in Cleveland and used that gorilla costume to meet Goulardi. So, there's a through line right there for you.
What do you think it is about this stuff that has influenced people like yourself and my friend J Bones to carry on the tradition and to create characters themselves and to do the dress up thing and to create these personas for themselves?
It's just the fun. Um, if there, with all the similarities between a kid show host and a horror host, and there are a lot. There are
It's
a
a
lot
lot.
of,
Yeah.
and once a generation is passed from one to the other, that happened back in the day.
Well, the horror hosts were also talking sometimes to kids, right? I mean, it was a multi-generational thing.
But they had a rebellious edge as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
You don't see people dressing up as kiddie show hosts as often as you do. There's not like, Captain Kangaroo cosplay going
Right.
on out there.
Bozo the clown
Oh
with
yeah.
Cookie. No. Okay.
But yeah, but there was this rebellious kind of quality
Mhm.
to the TV horror host. A lot of what they did was like, you know, we're going to do this. Don't let your folks know. But I'm going to tell you about this over here. Or
Yeah.
they just do crazy stuff. Good Lord, he would blow things up. This is 1963, and people would send in their models, and he'd blow them up on camera. You know, Nowhere else on television were you seeing anything like that.
Yeah.
And so that just plugged right into that sort of almost it was subversive sort of spirit,
Yeah.
and
But
kids
not in a
really
mean way, or
appreciate it.
not in a way that was nasty, but
No, no, no. It was
inviting
a
and fun and yeah. Yeah.
it was a release, you
Yes.
know, especially at again at that time, where things were pretty black and white. This is just, before the real 60s kicked in and things suddenly tuned to Technicolor. Um, yeah, so these little explosions were literally like explosions of enthusiasm of oh my God, I can't believe I saw that. Or the amoeba was just like, that is the weirdest damn thing. And again, it's homemade, it's
Yeah.
physical, it's something that a kid could make. And that's another important thing. And it's actually one of the connections with the kid show host is that as a local television personality, kids could send in their artwork. They would send in cards. People, your host would hold up the artwork and say, "This is from, you know, Danny Blots in Omaha, whatever, and so the kid becomes a star. You
Hmm.
know, you know, God, the next day at school, are you kidding me? People are going to stop you on the playground.
And sometimes these people would also have membership cards, which made you feel like you were a part of this thing,
Right.
like you're on
And
the inside.
and you know the um the inspirational quality of that can't be understated. I remember my wife and I went to see Bob Wilkins when he was appearing at an event in Sacramento back in 1998. And I said, my wife, we're going to get there hours early because we're going to be first in line, damn it. And we got there, it was like 3 hours before the doors opened, and there were already people there. And so we're chatting with them, hey, you jerks, what are you doing in front of me? Um, but and I said, so what do you do? He said, they work for ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. They grew up watching creature features, and that got them into Industrial Light and Magic.
Wow.
George Lucas actually wanted Bob Wilkins to be the president of Industrial Light and Magic, essentially Lucasfilm.
Right.
Um, but and but he would have had to move to Los Angeles for a couple of years while they built the Lucas facilities in the Marin area. And Bob just didn't want to uproot his family, and he hated Los Angeles. So he begged off and said, no, thanks. Basically, George said, I don't like dealing with the press. If you could be the face and do that, that'd be great. Um, but anyway, and Lucas had grown up um, watching Bob Wilkins' creature features in Modesto
You see that
as well.
running through all of his work, from Star Wars to even THX. I mean, there's his roots are apparent in so much of what he did. Well, listen, I could talk to you all day, but I don't want to be disrespectful of your time. Let's put a pin in it and come back and talk about more stuff at a later date. How about that?
That sounds wonderful.
Do you
Um,
have some place you want people to go look for you, that you have a
I
presence?
don't, you know what? I don't have a website. I'm not a big fan of social media,
Yeah.
so
I can't imagine why.
I really don't have anything. But and you can bleep this if you don't
Uh-oh.
No, no. Well, I'm just if people want to get in touch with me, because it is a topic of which I am passionate and love to continue conversations with people about, they can write me directly at my email account. Can I give that
If you
as
want to give it, yeah. Now this might be the equivalent of the guy who held up the phone number of
I
the
I know,
manager.
I know, but I my delete finger is
Okay.
well developed at this point. But I'm gonna give the name and then I'll spell it because it's different than folks might
I can put
expect.
it up here too. I can flash it across the screen.
Okay, thank you. It's DoktorGoulfinger at gmail.com. That's DoktorGoul finger.
I can't spell finger.
There's no H in Gould. H's are for the weak. But if you have any questions or stories, I'd love hearing about people's experiences with their local hosts.
Yeah.
And I would also point people to um, the Classic Horror Film Board. There's a whole
Are you
section
active
on.
there? Are you active
No,
there?
I used to be, but
Okay.
I'm a reader now. I just
Yeah. I think
haven't.
that's what I'll go there and read, but I won't post anything.
I used to have some really nice discussions with Don Glut and some of the other folks,
Oh
but
wow.
it just kind of fell
Tom
out of
Weaver is pretty active over there still, I
yeah.
think. Yeah.
But they've got a whole section on TV horror hosts, and most importantly, a section on forgotten TV horror hosts. And a lot of information is posted there. There are people I had never heard of, and uh, Gary something. One of the folks there, they're putting in a lot of time and effort pulling articles from newspaper.com and gathering a lot of information on these extremely localized hosts
Yeah.
from over time, and it's eye-opening. It's incredible stuff.
No, I can speak to that firsthand because I have a subscription to newspapers.com because of my commentary work
Sure.
and the things that you are able to find. It is amazing because everything that was printed is still there.
And if they're local newspapers talking about local events and local shows, um, it's totally unique to anything that you would get in a national publication.
Yes.
And there was that period of time rather than doing junkets where they pull everyone into one conference room and talk to the star at the same time. Those actors, writers, directors would all travel the country and hit these local shows. So each of those programs was unique. Creature Features was big on that. A lot of Star Trek, a lot of Star Wars stuff because that was our backyard industry out here. Um, but yeah, actors would come through and do Creature Features, do half-hour interviews. Get a two-camera setup,
Hmm.
so not not frequent cutting or anything.
Yeah.
And half-hour chats, which you just don't get that stuff anymore. It's 5 minute sound bites.
Only here with people like you where we get to talk about there's nobody telling us what we can and can't talk about. We have all the time that we want. This is the platform to continue conversations like that. But once they were everywhere, and it was with people people that are gone now. And so it's a
Yeah.
format that I miss, and I'm grateful that you are chronicling it. I'm grateful that you are. I'm grateful to call you a friend. It means so much to be able to talk to you about this stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh man, thank you very much as well. And I, I know I've expressed this in the past, but I just so appreciate your enthusiasm for the history of cinema, getting down to the birth of Hollywood and
Hmm.
things like just taking all of that so seriously now. Because there is another history that just disappears over time. And it really takes people continuing to do that archaeology to keep it alive and the connections that you start to find
Hmm.
and that can change that history. It's just amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you. It's a labor of love for me because I'm just curious. I have a curious mind who wants to
Yeah,
learn as much as possible about where the things that I enjoy came from. And the further, something will lead you to 10 years ago, and then that leads you to 30 years ago, and you just keep going further back and you trace these threads to you can trace them all the way back to the silent era, and then you can trace them to vaudeville, and you can trace them to
right.
Shakespeare. None of this stuff is new, but the way that it keeps representing itself with new paint, it's fascinating. So yeah, it's a labor of love.
And, and the surprising connections that you find along the way, how expansive things can get. You start talking about Tyrone Power, you can end up talking about World War II, because
Yeah,
and then the directors who did short films in World War II, and then it just goes on and on. And local TV, you end up talking about novelty records and
music.
music that they used on their shows, local bands, local news that was happening at the time. It's just, it's dropping a rock into that pond and just seeing those waves ripple out.
Yes. Yeah. It,
So anyway, thank you
we
very
see
much
the
again.
waves, but finding the stone, that's the thing.
Yeah.
I want to find those stones that started the waves. Yeah.
Yeah, and make and just the right size stone. You don't want to just splash and empty the pool either.
Right. Right. Michael Monahan, this has been a wonderful conversation. The book is American Scary, Volume 1. Volume 2 is coming out very soon. Links in the description of this episode. Michael, thank you so much.
Keith, thank you for everything. I appreciate it.